So for the second talk this evening, we're going to think about this whole question of, given all the options, why Jesus? How do we talk about the exclusivity of Jesus in this world we live in, surrounded by many, many other faiths? And to set the scene, I came across the story recently of a university student who was looking for a summer job. And he was leafing through the newspaper one day, and he came across a job advertisement placed by the local city zoo. It was rather vague to what they wanted, but the salary they were offering looked really quite impressive, and there was a phone number. He rang it up and booked an appointment for the interview. And again, they were a bit vague on the phone. Well, he got to the job interview, and he found out a bit more detail about why they were vague, because what they wanted, what they were looking to hire, was the problem they had was their star attraction. The zoo's star attraction, the gorilla, had died a few months before, and they hadn't got the money for a new gorilla. So they wanted to hire someone to dress up in a monkey suit and act the part for the summer. Well, it was a very odd job, but it was quite a lovely monkey suit, and the money was very good, so the student signed on the line. Well, the next day, his job started. He found it very easy. He walked around the gorilla enclosure. He made half-hearted roaring noises, and the crowd seemed fooled. No one seemed any the wiser. But boy, it was boring. So on day 2, he upped the ante slightly. He began leaping around the gorilla enclosure. He roared. He made, sort of gestures. The crowds grew. Peanuts were thrown. Camera phones flashed. It was really exciting. But still just that little bit anticlimactic. So on day 3, he kicked it up even a higher level. Hanging in the middle of the gorilla enclosure was this vine, was this creeper. And he grabs hold of it and begins swinging to and fro like this, roaring ferociously. The crowds grew phenomenally. People cheered. Higher and higher he swung, but he overdid it because he swung so high that the vine broke, it snapped. And he flew in a graceful parabolic arc, which Martin could calculate to 4 decimal places, out of the gorilla enclosure and landed with a crash in the lion enclosure next door. He came around from the mild concussion to see a large, angry-looking lion advancing on him, muscles rippling beneath its silky fur. In one, he began crying out to the crowds, "Help, help, I'm just a man in a suit." Well, in one fluid motion, the lion leapt. It sprang, it pinned him to the floor, and then it said in a fierce whisper, "Shut up, you'll get us all fired." That is such a dad joke, it's unreal, but Jeff is laughing like it's no tomorrow. I tell you that appalling story because it does set the scene. And it sets the scene this way. I think many people think that all the religions in the world are a bit like the animals in that story. That outwardly they may look different, but that underneath they are pretty much the same. And so one of the accusations flung at Christians is that you Christians, you are arrogant, you are narrow-minded, you are bigoted, you are intolerant, the list goes on, because you insist that Christianity and Christianity alone is true. And how arrogant, how can you say that when there are all these other religions? Buddhism, Hinduism, Sikhism, Jainism, Judaism, etc., etc., etc. I have an old friend of mine back in Canada. His name is Jeff. He teaches, did teach until he retired at the University of Toronto. And Jeff he liked to bill himself as a universalist. So he believed that all the world's religions are essentially the same. And we used to have regular arguments about this because he would regularly try and persuade me out of my narrow, exclusivistic ways. And on one occasion, we were having coffee together, and he shared an illustration. He said, "Andy, I've got an idea. I've got an illustration that I think may persuade you that I'm right and that you evangelical conservative Christians are far too narrow." I said, "This will be good. What's the illustration?" He said, "Well, Andy, think about a mountain for a moment. That's not a mountain. That's a mountain. That's not a mountain. I've gone too far. That's Speaker's Corner. Let's go back one. That's a mountain. That's Mount Everest." He said, "Imagine a mountain." And he said, "Imagine that God is the summit of the mountain. Well, why not imagine that all the different religions in the world just represent different paths up that mountain? There's the Christian path up the mountain. There's the Buddhist path, and the Hindu path, and the Jewish path. There's even the atheist path. They don't believe in God, so it goes in circles around the bottom, but they've still got their own path. Everyone's got their own path up the mountain. And so rather than thinking my path is the only way or better than somebody else's, why not just affirm that everyone's on their own journey to the summit?" And he sat back, took a large swig of coffee, and smiled, peaceably at me and said, "What do you think?" And I looked at him for a moment and went, "I actually think, Jeff, that's one of the potentially worst illustrations I've ever heard." He looked heartbroken. If you criticize Canadians, they often look like you've kicked a puppy. And he said, "But what's wrong with the illustration?" He said, I've heard it from other people, and he's right. It's actually quite a popular illustration that's out there. I said, "Well, Jeff, one of the problems is this. I'm a mountaineer. As a hobby, I climb mountains. It's why I moved from Scotland to Swindon, by the way, because of our mighty mountain ranges down there in Wiltshire. Now, I climb mountains, and this is Everest. I actually have been to, not to the top, but to the base camp on the north face. I love mountains. I said, Jeff, I've climbed many mountains. And I said, I can tell you categorically that every path does not lead to the top of the mountain. I said, some paths lead over the back of the mountain, round the mountain. Some don't even leave the car park. They just go to the tea shop. I said, some paths end in massive rock faces and terrifying, dizzying drops because they were built by rock climbers who are insane. I said, if you are lost on a mountain, and the fog comes down, you've lost your map and your compass, and Sirius fails you. I said, if you just follow the first path you come to blindly, you will probably not end up at the top of the mountain. You are quite likely to end up as a pizza-shaped stain at the bottom of the mountain. He looked somewhat heartbroken at this. I said, it gets worse. He went, it gets worse? You just wrecked my illustration. I said, yeah. I said, Jeff, I've got a question for you. I said, Jeff, where would you have to be? You said that God's the summit of the mountain. He went, yeah, and all paths lead to the top. Yeah. Well, so I also put it to you that you can't even, where would you have to be standing? Sorry, where would you have to be standing to see that all paths lead to the top of the mountain? You can't see from the bottom. Where would you have to be to see that all paths led to the top? He thought for a moment. He said, oh, I see your point. You'd have to be probably standing already on the summit, wouldn't you? I went, well, actually, no, because if you are standing on the summit of a mountain, the paths go over the edge. You can't see if they go to the bottom. He said, oh, yeah, okay. He said, okay, what if I was floating 300 meters above the mountain, like Google Earth view? I went, yes, that could work. He went, brilliant. The illustration works. I went, well, yeah, apart from you've said that God is the summit of the mountain, and you positioned yourself 300 meters above the summit. Who do you think you are, Jeff? And should I be worshipping you this morning? He never used the illustration since. And okay, I had some fun with that, but the point is, however you try and explain it and illustrate it, you run into problems when you start trying to unpack the idea that all the world's religions, with all their different ideas, could in some way be the same. Well, until the mid-1990s, I hadn't thought much about this stuff. As I told you in the interview with Martin at the beginning, when I went to Speaker's Corner in the late 1990s, that was really when I first began talking to people of a different faith, in that case Muslims. And until the point I went to Speaker's Corner, I think I probably assumed that the world's religions were broadly the same. I think, yes, I was a Christian, but I'd grown up in a school with many Muslims. I was at the same school as Sadiq Khan, Mayor of London, Muslim, and there were many other Muslims in my school. And I guess I'd have sort of thought, well, they're probably pretty similar to me with a few differences. But I very quickly discovered at Speaker's Corner that the Muslims there believed fundamentally different things to what I believed. I met Buddhists there who believed fundamentally different things to what I believed. I got a crash course at Speaker's Corner in the idea that far from being fundamentally the same and superficially different, that the world's religions are in fact superficially the same and fundamentally different. And those encounters at Speaker's Corner, I got so fascinated by, I went on to write write a book on Muslims and Christians, which is the Muslims and Christians Same God book that I waved at you earlier. But the more I engaged with Muslims at Speaker's Corner, the more I studied Islam academically, the more I found myself drawn inexorably to the conclusion that Christianity and Christianity alone was true. Now, you are a very friendly audience this morning. If I stood on a stage in a university, in a mixed audience, and I said, I think that Christianity and Christianity alone is true, they would throw things at me. Or if they were shy, like Scottish students, they would just glower at you in a kind of unfriendly way, because that's heresy to the modern mind, saying that Christianity alone is true. I would be having people saying to me things like, but isn't that narrow-minded? Isn't it intolerant? How can you be that naive? Well, if you've got friends who that would be their objection, and it's a big question in today's modern age, one of the initial questions I'd want to raise in response is I would like to say to somebody, have you ever noticed, have you ever wondered about the observation that all truth claims are actually exclusive? It seems to be the very nature of truth that it excludes its opposite. So if you say that the capital of the UK, the capital of England, is London, you're excluding, tragically, the possibility that it's Hull. If you say that 2 + 2 is 4, you're excluding the possibility that it's 7 or 9 or 347.2. Whenever you make any truth claim, you are excluding the opposite. And incidentally, if you say that you think all religions lead to God, like my friend Jeff did, you are actually excluding those people who think that only one religion leads to God, and you are actually excluding atheists who think that all religion is utter nonsense. So you cannot actually include everybody. The only way to be 100% inclusive is to never say anything about anything ever, period. So given that, why do so many people think that it's arrogant to say only one religion is true? Why is it we have no problem, our friends have no problem with exclusive truth when it comes to mathematics or engineering or geography? Why is it they have a problem when it comes to religion? Well, I wonder if the problem is that many people out there, most of our friends out at the four walls of this building, think that religion is all about being good. Many people think that religion is all about being good and moral and upright. And if you think religion is about being good, when you hear somebody say, my religion is true and others aren't, that gets translated into moral superiority. It gets translated into this person thinks they are better, nicer, or holier than other people. That, I think, is one of the underlying problems. To which a question that may be worth asking our friends is, what if true religion has very little to do with being good? What if true religion has very little to do with being good? Think back to that story we had from Mark's Gospel earlier of Jesus and the rich young ruler, where this issue was a very much a live issue in that story. That young man was convinced, wasn't he, that the way to heaven, the way to paradise, the way to God was through being good. He comes to Jesus with that question, and Jesus demolishes that entirely. And as we say, he then goes on to reveal the issue of money as the real stumbling block. But Jesus there is faced with a young man who thinks morality is the way forward, and Jesus has no time for it at all. That young man thought that if he was a good person, if he kept the commandments, then he would be okay. And that's a very common religious viewpoint, actually. Many of the world's religions operate on that basis. Certainly Islam, the religion that I've spent 25 years of my life studying, the religion I know better, the only religion I know better than that is my own faith, Christianity. Most religions in the world say it's about the stuff that you do that ensures where you go in the hereafter. There is only one religion I know that reverses that pattern. There's only one religion I know that says, no, it's not about our behavior, but it's about something else entirely. And the radical claim, the unique claim at the heart of the Christian faith is not that if we are clever enough or wise enough or moral enough, we can bridge the gap between us and God from our side. Rather, it's the incredibly radical countercultural message that nothing we can do can bridge the gap from our side, but that God can bridge it from his. As the later Tim Keller once put it, he wrote, the gospel message is that I am so flawed that Jesus had to die for me. Yet I am so loved and so valued that Jesus was glad to die for me. That is the unique news at the heart of Christianity. And it reminds us that it's Jesus is the great differentiator in all of this evening. The question in one sense isn't what's unique about Christianity. The question is what's unique about Jesus. I always want to say to my friends, well, what's unique about Jesus is it's Jesus who reverses the pattern we see in every other religion. It's Jesus who is the one who teaches and demonstrates that it's not by cleverness or goodness or experience that we build this staircase to heaven, but the God who steps down in the person of Jesus. And Christians are not arrogant or bigoted or intolerant for wanting to claim that Jesus was unique. He makes that claim himself. But how is he unique? If our friends say to us, okay, you're banging on about Jesus, what is so special about Jesus? Well, I'd like to show you 3 ways in my last 12 minutes how Jesus is unique, ways that we can introduce to our friends when we talk about this question of uniqueness. And to help us do it, I want to just read a few verses from the beginning of John's Gospel, verses 1 through 5 of chapter 1, and then verses 14 through 18, and then show you 3 things that are unique here. So we read, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Then on to verse 14. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. So I think there are 3 things that are unique about Christianity, all centered around Jesus and all to be found there in that passage and actually throughout John's Gospel and in fact the New Testament. And the first thing that's unique about Christianity I want to give to you this evening is Christianity is unique because of its origin. It's unique because of its origin. It's unique because its founder claimed to be God himself. Jesus did not claim to be just another guru or just another rabbi or just another teacher of morals or just another prophet or wise man. He claimed to be God himself, come to reconcile us to himself. And that's a staggering claim, one that is all but impossible to get around. You know, it's long fascinated me that even if somebody disbelieves utterly in Christianity, you can't get away from the uniqueness of Jesus. I often use this thought experiment with when I'm talking to secular audiences. I make the observation, isn't it interesting that if you were to make two lists, and on this list we were to write the names of the most influential people in the whole of history, and on this list we were to write a list of names of people who have claimed to be God. Only one person would turn up on both those lists. That would be Jesus. Doesn't prove he's true, but it is interesting. What's also even more interesting is you could remove the founder of any other religion from history, and that religion could still stand. So if the Buddha had never been born, somebody else could have taught the Noble Path and the Eightfold Truths and all these things. Martin could have taught what we now know as Buddhism. It would look basically the same, except it would be called Martinism, and there'd be little green statues of yourself in jade on mantelpieces all across Asia. But it would look the same. If Muhammad had never been born, somebody else could have taught what we now know as the Quran. Islamic theology is very clear on this point. There was nothing special about Muhammad. He was merely a human being, merely a warner, as Muslims call him. But it could still be Islam. Didn't require Muhammad. And so it goes until you come to Jesus. On the other hand, when it comes to Jesus and Christianity, though, something very different is going on. If you remove Jesus, Christianity falls entirely because Christianity is Jesus. Christianity is Christ. In fact, somebody once remarked that if you take Christ out of Christian, you are left with three letters, I, A, and N. And Ian cannot help you. Never do that joke again either. Christianity is not a set of ideas brought by Jesus. Christianity is Jesus Christ. And in his teaching, that's why Jesus made it consistently all about him. He would say things like, you have heard that it was said. He would quote the Jewish scriptures, and then he would say, but I say to you. To the rich young ruler, he says, sell everything, give it all up, mate, and then come and follow me. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Jesus made it all about himself because he was no mere teacher. He was God himself. Christianity is unique in its origin. Secondly, Christianity is unique in its method. What do I mean by that? Well, it's been observed that every other religion in the world you can divide up into three categories. The world's major faith traditions are either based upon, thinking, they are based upon feeling, or they are based upon doing. You can divide the world's religions into those based on thinking, those based on feeling, and those based on doing. So in religions based on thinking, Buddhism would be an excellent example of this. You have to master the right truths, learn the right doctrines, learn the right ideas. And if you master those, then you can arrive at a higher state of human existence, the top of the mountain, whatever it is you're looking for. You do it via thinking. Then there are religions that take a different route. They say, no, it's all about feeling. And a religion's based on feeling, like many Eastern religions. It's by having the right kind of spiritual encounter, connecting with the mystical, the numinous, get in touch with the divine, that you can, again, transcend the ordinary and achieve some higher plane of existence. And then thirdly, there are religions based on doing, which tell you, live this way, keep these commands, follow these instructions, do enough of that stuff, and you can earn enough merit, climb your way upwards, and arrive at heaven, inner peace, or so on and so forth. And it's been observed by those who study comparative religion that you can divide all the world's religions into those three categories. But there is one that kind of breaks that whole structure, and it's Christianity. Because Christianity is not a system of thought, although it's got some amazing ideas to think about. The gospel is not a feeling or a set of warm, fuzzy emotions, although knowing Jesus personally can be emotionally very enriching. And neither is the gospel a set of deeds or actions to carry out, although Jesus' message will change how you behave if you really take it seriously. Jesus did not come to bring new thoughts, new feelings, or new commands, but he came as God himself to reveal God to us. That's what makes Jesus unique. Interestingly, religious systems based on thinking are all about ideas and words. But did you notice that in the start of John's Gospel a moment ago, we read that the Word has become flesh? The heart of Christianity is the idea the gospel is not an idea or a concept. It's something concrete. Jesus actually came into space and time and history and made God known to us. And that makes Jesus unique. Furthermore, you might observe that religions based on feeling are all about the experience, the moment that kind of overwhelms you and changes your life. But Jesus said some things about life. And in John 17, verse 3, he defined life in terms of knowing him. That's what Jesus said true life is like, that they know him. And that raises a question for all of us, doesn't it? Have we received that? Because everybody is looking for fullness of life, I find. Some people are chasing fullness of life in riches, or in power, or in fame, or in sexual conquest, or mystical experiences. But Jesus said true life is found in one place only, and knowing him. And that is why, ladies and gentlemen, all other religious systems fail, because we human beings can't create life in ourselves. We don't have the ability. It has to come as a gift from outside. And that's the promise of the gospel. The heart of the gospel is that radical, radical claim that Jesus did not come to make bad people good, but he came to make dead people live. And there is all the difference. And then thirdly, of course, religious systems based on doing, they're highly pragmatic. Think of Islam and its massive body of Sharia law, thousands of commands. Do this, don't do this, do the other thing, so on and so forth. Do these things and you could get merit, blessing, and favor. Well, interestingly also in John's Gospel, in John 6:28, the disciples are thinking this way. Because we read that the disciples come trotting along to Jesus and they say, Jesus, what must we do to do the works that God requires? They ask in the plural. They're thinking this way. They're thinking, okay, the time has come, Jesus, can you give us some new commands so we can get out and get this stuff done? Notice they ask in the plural, but Jesus answers in the singular. He says, the work of God is this, to believe, to trust in the one that he has sent. And all of that flows together into John 14, verse 6, that famous verse where Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to God the Father except through me. Jesus claimed to be the way to live. He claimed to be the truth embodied. He claimed to be the gift of life itself. In other words, Jesus claimed to fulfill and sum up and supersede the claims and the promises and the hopes of every other religion out there. And he makes it all about himself. Jesus said, it's not about you doing these things. It's if you come to me, then you can know God through me. And that's what makes Jesus unique. It puts him in a class of his own. And sometimes when people say to me, why do you think that Jesus is unique? I find a helpful question to ask is, okay, can you tell me to whom I should compare him? Who else makes the claims that he did? Who else makes the promises that he did? Who else lived the life that he did, died the death that he did, had the resurrection he did? If you can find another contender, I will happily compare them side by side. But it seems to me there is no one to whom I can even compare Jesus to engage in that conversation. So the gospel is unique in its origin. It's unique in its purpose. Lastly, and very briefly, before we wrap it up and head into a time of Q&A, I want to suggest to you, finally, that the gospel is unique when it comes to its purpose. It's unique in its origin, its method, and its purpose. And what's the gospel's purpose? Well, I would say to you, it's all about transformation. And this is interesting, because lots of the world's other religions talk about transformation. It's a common idea in religions. Lots of other world's religions say that if you work hard and you think the right things, if you work hard and have the right experiences, if you work hard and keep the right commandments and do the right stuff, then maybe, if you are very fortunate at the end of life, whatever, not merely may you get to nirvana or paradise or whatever, maybe, you might just change. Maybe. It's not guaranteed, but it's possible if you try hard enough. By contrast, once again, in comes Jesus and the Christian faith and just turns the tables over entirely. And Jesus and the Christian faith, the gospel says, it doesn't end with transformation, people. It begins with transformation. Jesus said, you must be born again. Or as Paul writes in 2 Corinthians, if anyone is in Christ, they are, not they'll become, but they are a new creation. The old has gone, the new is here. And a great question for all of us to ask ourselves, not just as we think about sharing our faith with our friends, but just personally, is do we know what that new creation life looks like? Have we received it? Because to be a Christian is not to sign up to a set of ideas or a moral philosophy. It's not to have some wonderful experience, not to obey a set of commands or memorize an entire volume of systematic theology. None of those things. But to be a Christian is to know the very transformation of our very person. It's interesting, isn't it? Because the problem we face as human beings is not a lack of knowledge. The problem we face as human beings is not a lack of experiences, nor a lack of moral instructions. The problem we face as human beings is that our very nature has become corrupt and twisted and broken. What we need is new creation. And that's what God offers us in Jesus. Somebody once remarked that if our greatest need had been information, God could have sent us an educator. If our greatest need had been technology, God could have sent us a scientist. If our greatest need had been money, God could have sent us an economist. If our greatest need had been pleasure, God could have sent us an entertainer. But our greatest need was forgiveness. And so God sent us a savior. That's our basic human problem. That's the problem that Jesus came to address, and he does so uniquely. He's not primarily interested in ensuring that we think the right thoughts, have some wonderful experience, or even change our patterns of behavior. Those things may come, but his primary aim is to move us from darkness to light, from death to life. That's what being a Christian means. So if you're sitting here today as a Christian and you've drifted a bit into thinking it is about what you think or do or experience, then what perhaps a good opportunity to just remind yourself that new life is what it's all about, and bring it back to Jesus, who is the center of it all, so we can then share that center, that good news with our friends, because that's what Jesus is all about, because it was Jesus who said, I have come that you might have life and have it to the full. And it's my hope and prayer for each of you tonight that you've experienced that, you're living in the joy of that, and then that joy can overflow to sharing that news of Jesus with those around us, because given our need and given what's on offer on the table, Jesus is the only option. So that's why, in a world of lots of different faiths and claims out there, I believe Jesus stands alone. So let's go share him with our friends. Thanks for listening, Martin.